Hi, I'm Frank Masiosi, and I'm here with former Mayor Jordan Glatt and Eileen Kelly, who is running for the council seat for a three-year term in Ward 1. Hello, Eileen.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
Thank you for
Welcome.
participating. So we have a series of questions. We're asking all the same questions, which were developed jointly by Jordan and me to both candidates. So I'll kick it off with the first one. Eileen, what caused you to raise your hand?
It's a great question. It's probably the most common question I've gotten. For me, I always get involved in the communities that I live in. And when my husband and I decided that we were going to raise our family in Summit, I started getting involved locally. I started attending council meetings, started listening, asking the occasional question, hearing the discourse. And I really saw three areas where I believed I could, if elected, add value. And those three areas were first in my newness. Today, the Common Council is primarily made up of people who have lived in Summit for more than a decade. Two people are generational on Summit and multi-generational, in Summit. Their families grew up here, they grew up here. And while I think that's really important, I think that it's not necessarily reflective of the community today in Summit. There are lots of new families in our community. I don't have the exact figure, but anecdotally, I'd like to say about 3 out of 10 people who I meet are brand new to Summit. They've just moved here, they've lived here less than a year. And so I think that there's a really important perspective that we're missing on council, someone new, someone fresh, that can understand why people leave in New York City or Hoboken and what they're looking for in Summit's future when they raise their children here. That was the first reason. The second area I saw as an opportunity for running was really my corporate sector experience. When you look at the makeup of the council, there's a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of nonprofit experience, working in government as well is another area. But in terms of corporate experience, in terms of working in a Fortune 500, I saw an opportunity to, again, bring my knowledge and know-how. I've worked over 12 years in Fortune 500 companies and multinationals. I have worked abroad in Asia, in Europe. I've lived and worked in South America. And so I'm familiar with managing diverse teams, executing large initiatives. My current employer is actually a company of about 20,000 people, roughly the size of Summit. And in reporting to the CFO and working very closely with the C-suite, I'm familiar with how layers of companies work, bureaucracy works, running large initiatives. I think very similar to some of the dynamics that we see in local government. And so I think that experience is very unique, candidly, to the Common Council and could be of value. The third reason I decided to run, and I'm sure this is why every member of Common Council decides to run, is to give back. Candidly, for me, in my family, I'm from a working class family. My dad's an Irishman from the Bronx. My mother is an immigrant from Ecuador. And I'm the first person in my family to graduate from a four-year college. And so I know the sacrifices that a family has to make to get to live in a place like Summit. I grew up in a similar community, and how important a strong public school system is, a strong community is in the future success of the child. And so I think, in thinking about ways of how I can give back, I feel that a lot of my private sector experience, my volunteerism would translate well to our city government.
Thank you. Jordan.
So you may have hit on some of this already, but what personal attributes make you right for council?
I think one of the key things, and this is something I've, even in an environment that has obviously been a very difficult environment because of the severe health crisis we're in and economic crisis, is my outreach, my ability to want to and energetically connect with people from all different backgrounds. I think in some ways I'm uniquely set up to do that because of my upbringing, because I am half Ecuadorian, and I lived a portion of high school in Quito in Ecuador. I lived a number of years in Buenos Aires. So with our Hispanic community, for example, I can interact with them in Spanish. And I think that's important given that they are a large minority group in Summit. But I really enjoy it. I've thought of creative ways in how to engage with our community And in addition to the community outreach, the desire to want to meet people and work with people and hear from all different types of people, I alluded earlier to my private sector experience, and I think that is unique both in international work experience and my management of teams. The last thing I'll say as well, and I think what are some of the attributes that make me uniquely qualified, is I also have, a few years ago, launched a travel app. And so I have experience in technology and running a small business. And I think when we look at the environment right now in Summit, especially for our small businesses who are struggling in a variety of ways, bringing that perspective, understanding maybe what their resources they might need or the struggles they're going through is important to have on council.
Thank you.
So, again, this is something I think you've touched on, but briefly, what is it in your prior experience that makes you suited for a position on council? Maybe you've completely answered that.
I'll add some emphasis if it's helpful. I'll add some volunteer emphasis because I talked a lot about my professional experience. I've worked as well, I serve on the board of 2 nonprofits. And again, the dynamics of working on a board, what are the things that are important, the direction that you want to focus on as a board member for your organization. One of them is a long-standing organization and actually based out of Harlem, New York. It's got a rich history, servicing families throughout the New York City area. And that board has gone through a lot of transitions. So I think that's just an added experience that I've had that I think would, again, when we look at the transition of what's going on locally, managing COVID and managing through it and hopefully getting out of it soon, I'm familiar with that type of transitional work at the board level.
What's the difference between a Republican and a Democrat on the local level?
You know, when I first started just reading candidate statements and getting to know a little bit about prior candidates that have run in Summit, I really couldn't read a difference. I think we all have the same common goals, and I think that's a great thing. I think on the local level, there are plenty of examples of Republicans and Democrats, and I happen to be with 2 great ones right now who have served our community. And I think it's really important to emphasize that, you know, in Summit, we put our politics aside at the local level. There isn't much of a differentiation. And in fact, I think any type of messaging or communication that tries to emphasize that does a disservice to our community.
Thank you.
Putting aside municipal government, what do you believe are the philosophical differences between the 2 parties?
Well, I think philosophically, for me, one of the kind of key ways I approach problem solving is always with the framework that a lot of times the leaner that we can deliver our service, the better. I think government at the maybe local level, less so, but certainly on a larger level tends to be very bureaucratic and large. And I think that is one important sort of distinction philosophically. Leaner is more efficient. The more money that we can give back to taxpayers, I think is also an important point to note historically, although I think everyone locally in Summit is hyper-focused on taxes regardless of party affiliation. But general framework and approach and thinking that smaller government is probably a better avenue to take.
Eileen, every candidate talks about improving downtown retail. This is especially important now because of the setbacks because of COVID. What do you think can be done to reinvigorate our downtown?
I think this is a really important question. And I think when I started engaging with our small businesses, both in the downtown and outside of the downtown, Morris Avenue, Park Avenue, I've seen firsthand and heard firsthand the struggles that they're going through. And I think a lot of the conversations I've had with business owners is how can they reimagine how to deliver their service because they're sort of propelled in a moment that they hadn't expected. I think on a local level, there's 2 kind of key things I think we can do to support our small businesses. And this, I think, will help them thrive and ultimately help our city thrive. The first is, I believe, and again, engaging one-on-one with a lot of small business owners, I think there's a real opportunity to establish a formalized mentorship program. Summit has incredible resources, former C-suite individuals, people with MBAs, people that might be taking a break from work. And while we have a lot of volunteerism activities, they tend to work in the immediate, so giving out food, packaging supplies. And I think a formal business mentorship program would go a long way for many of our small business owners who might need an area of expertise in operations or finance or marketing or e-commerce strategy. And that's certainly a service that is expensive. So I think formalizing that. I think the other thing, when we think about Summit and how to market ourselves to businesses, I think we really need to evaluate sort of an A to Z, map out what steps it takes to open up a business in Summit, and then analyze it. So what process can I remove? Where can I digitize? Where can I add an incentive? Where can I defer a fee or take out a fee? I think the easier we can make it for businesses to survive in this environment and be excited to operate here, I think that will help our downtown vitality a lot.
Thank you.
Union County taxes are a huge burden on our residents. Many in the past have tried different approaches to deal with the county. What would you do differently?
So I think this year we gave about $40 million to Union County. And one thing, I think I've consistently heard, especially when walking around the Bryant Park area, is, why isn't Bryant Park fixed? Where does our Union County taxes go? I think two things need to happen. I think first, we need a consistent relationship with Union County that's public. So maybe it's a formal minutes review of the Union County meeting. What was Summit's comment in that meeting? And I think we also need to ask for more information. $40 million is a lot of money, and I think we could use more transparency in how that's allocated, both to other communities and back to Summit. And I think we pay our fair share to ask for that information. I think lastly is, it's about partnership, but it's also about ensuring that the needs of Summit, like Bryant Park, like Morris Avenue, are updated and taken care of in a timely fashion. So there is a certain element that you have to fight for our community as well.
With 565 municipalities in New Jersey, the concept of sharing services has long been appealing. Where do you see opportunities for shared services in Summit?
That's a really important question. And I think when we look at the million-dollar question about how to minimize the tax burden in this community, that's certainly an avenue to explore. I don't necessarily know if it's a shared services opportunity, but I think on the topic of recycling specifically, because the recycling expenditure in Summit has gone up pretty significantly. No fault to anyone in the city, it's more the macro implications of what's going on in that environment. I would certainly think about exploring, the investment of perhaps a piece of technology, robotics, doing some research on what the most innovative cities are doing in a space like that. And then could you potentially, again, use that as a shared service with other municipalities to lower the initial investment and still get the return on investment. So I think finding areas where our expenditures have gone up in the budget, recycling being one key one that's the most glaring, is where I'd start.
Great, thank you.
There's a lot of national press on the subject of policing and the role of policemen. What are your thoughts on this as they pertain to Summit?
Another really important question. I think that with any national issue, it's extremely important to localize it, to make it pertinent to our community, to understand the way it's impacting our residents. And I can tell you, in door knocking from 6 feet from the door or meeting residents downtown, that 9 out of 10 residents are overwhelmingly positive and complimentary about our Summit police force. And I concur. I think they've done a tremendous job with community policing, for example. I think when I do meet someone who might raise a point around how they feel as a Hispanic person or a Black person and being looked at differently, I think we really just have to continue the work of community policing to emphasize the importance of that. And two tangible things come to mind if I'm elected to council. One is continuing the idea of coffee with a cop. So I speak fluent Spanish. I can help, for example, translate a session, host a session with Coffee with a Cop downtown, create a more friendly environment for people to feel that, our police force is obviously as wonderful as we know it is. I think the other area or question to raise is, what does our police department need locally? How are they maneuvering and navigating obviously a very sensitive issue, both nationally and then obviously here locally where they see it. And one thing I can think of in terms of a resource for our community is, the offering of, for example, Spanish classes to our police department, so they can get an elementary understanding of Spanish. Would that be helpful? I think that's something I would, look to explore further with our Summit Police Department.
Thank you. Summit is constantly talking about redevelopment. What are your thoughts of areas that need to be addressed and for what purpose?
Redevelopment is, I think, it's been a long-standing conversation from my understanding, many years in the works. One of the things I love about Summit, and one of the reasons that my husband and I absolutely love living here and are excited to raise our family here is this small town charm of Summit. I think it's something we need to preserve. I think in the context of redevelopment, I think we need to be really cautious that we don't want to change the look and feel of this community with 7-story buildings, for example. I think the other kind of key thing about redevelopment is we want to be cautious that in an economic environment where so many small businesses are struggling, that we don't move too quickly to redevelop, and that we really, we look at our occupancy rate post-COVID. We make sure that our downtown is thriving before we get into redevelopment. I think one area specifically around, from Springfield Avenue walking to the middle school, I've heard a lot of parents say, that is a beautiful green space. It's a safe green space. It's one of the few areas in this community where our kids can walk and it's not traffic filled. So again, I think the dynamics of redevelopment need to be put within the context of why people live here, what they love about living here, the safety of our children, the implications of traffic, and still look to, bring in ratables that are going to make sense. They're going to burden the tax, lessen the burden, of taxes on our residential property holders. But I think it's a very delicate balance, especially in this environment.
What are your thoughts on the Broad Street West redevelopment?
Well, I recently, I think it's probably a couple months now, I called for some added transparency in that space. Who exactly was the committee, the individuals working in terms of the negotiation, and what any initial agreement looks like. I think some of the similar things I've just mentioned around, making sure that we maintain the city of Summit sort of in the character and the look and feel of why I believe people love this community. So a lot of the similar things I've said before. And in looking at sort of the initial renderings in the agreement, I think we need to have a continued dialogue. I believe it's been over a year since we've had a town hall. It's a big number of big decisions and lots of important changes have happened since that last town hall. So I think opening up the conversation again to the community is really important.
What do you think the biggest things in Summit that need to be fixed?
I think some of the kind of key things, less so I would say about getting fixed, but that could use more attention. I've heard consistently from a lot of small business owners that, process and sometimes bureaucracy get in the way of them, even in this environment, which is an impossible environment, of them being able to navigate. And so I think the more attention we can place there, it's a good use of our time, because if our businesses are doing well, our city is doing well, and obviously the downstream effect is positive for our taxpayers. I think on the issue of safety, whether it's pedestrian safety, traffic safety, crime, I think there needs to be a really broader view, especially on pedestrian safety, of where groups of residents feel that it's particularly unsafe, maybe because of speeding or because of sidewalk projects. And I know there is a larger sidewalk project initiative underway, but because of COVID, we haven't necessarily seen as much information come out, for example, about the Butler Parkway sidewalk initiative. And so I think that's an area where there's a lot of new families in Summit, a lot of young kids, a lot of parents paying attention to some of the safety issues, and we need to be proactive in evaluating some of those safety components. I think the last thing in terms of, again, adding extra priority and emphasis is around our budget. We face some pretty challenging revenue obstacles this year, and so I think we need to be proactive in talking about revenue more. Planning for worst case scenario, I think, is better than waiting for us to be reactive. So more proactiveness in general, I think, is important.
Eileen, how would you manage the city budget? Can you identify new revenue sources or ways of reducing expenses?
Really important question. So when I think about the city budget, I think, again, we have to first compartmentalize it into what expenses have gone up. Touched upon that earlier, recycling being one. I think we need to reimagine a bit how we're delivering our government services. I think in the time, especially of COVID, where a lot of the habits of the people that live in Summit have changed, at least in the short term, maybe in the medium term, and maybe even permanently, we need to think differently about how we deliver certain services. And what are the new priorities for people that are now residing here more full-time, working from home 3 days or 5 days a week? So I think that's an important element of evaluating on the expenses side. I think on the revenue side, we probably, again, when we think about parking, the municipal golf course, the pool, those three areas were most hit with revenue issues this year. I think we also have to think about getting creative on how we might want to evaluate different parking structures, tiering of pricing in light of what could be a second wave of COVID, or people just now spending a lot more time in Summit on a permanent basis.
Car thefts and break-ins are an issue, given our proximity to Route 24. How would you deal with that?
I think this is a really important question. And one of the questions I asked at a council meeting now a few months ago was regarding an investment that the city made, Summit Police Department made, for cameras that would help track the license plate, I believe the license plate readers of any cars, that are perhaps flagged as being stolen vehicles going onto Route 24. And so I think we really need to leverage tools like that, the best type of technology that the police department can recommend in their experience. And then we need to see if it's effective and really ensure that if it's not, we continue to look for other measures that can put our police officers less at risk and put us in a better position to manage, spikes in crime or, attempts at theft.
If elected, when your 3-year term ends, how would you like to be remembered?
I really like that question, Frank. Frank and Jordan, I know you guys came up with it together. I'd like to be remembered as someone that reached out to as many people and tried to bring as many people to participate in our local government. I think local government is such an exciting place to be. It's a place where innovation can happen. I think a lot of times at other levels of government, it's quite difficult to be innovative. And so I think the more we can bring people in and the more I can help create an environment where people feel that their ideas are not only heard, but that we experiment with them, that we pilot them. I would love to be remembered that way. And, I'd like to be seen as a role model for children in our community. I think it's important that they see that, a young woman can run for council, that, she can have an active voice in this community, and that she can be representative of a diverse background as well.
Well, thank you. And with that ends our list of questions. So number one, thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you for raising your hand and running.
Exactly.
And I want to say to the people out there, whoever you favor, please vote. That's important. Please come and vote. So thank you.